Hey folks, it's Nate, and it's time I got back to the drawing board, and I'm here with a channel update and another indie comic review. Channel update is pretty straightforward. I'm starting to put out videos again, and they're going to be coming out on Mondays and Fridays. So, check them out. Also, the channel name will be changing. I don't know what I want to change it to just yet, but I do know I don't want to roll things over into the Horizon Talker channel, which is my other channel, which you can find by clicking on channels up there. That is primarily for fiction projects and updates on fiction projects. And while I do want to start doing a regular writing vlog on that channel, I don't want to roll over these more commentary type videos or book reviews into that channel. So what I'm going to be doing instead is I'm going to be renaming this channel to something. Maybe something that ties into that name. Maybe we'll keep the Talker, and it'll be something Talker or Horizon something. I don't know yet. I am still working on that part, but I want it to be something that you can tell people to put in the search bar and they'll actually find this channel. Right now, they can't do that. So that's all the updates. Like I said, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Kind of up in the air, unfortunately, but what can you do? Let's take a look at the comic. This is Shadowbinders from Clownfish Comics. And if that sounds to you like it's related to a YouTube channel, that's because you're a very perceptive person. This comes to you from Neon and Geeky Sparkles of Clownfish TV. Clownfish Comics is, of course, their comic imprint. It's got a very nice logo that looks pretty much like the Clownfish TV logo. It's worth checking out. Ooh, we got some natural light there. How about that? This is a compilation of a webcomic they did for a while. The copyright on the back says from 2010 to 2018. I don't know how regularly it was updating in that time. This seems like kind of thin pickings for an 8-year running webcomic. But then again, if it was only updating once or twice a week, it could be this, I suppose. But I suspect there were just hiatuses in there, and 2018 is probably when they stopped producing new content. More on that in a bit. So, Shadowbinders is an interesting read. Let's talk a little bit, of course, about the form factor first. It's a hardback. I like hardbacks. They look good on the shelf. They feel good in the hand. I don't have to worry about them falling apart on readings. And if you do get these, and you have any members of their intended audience on hand, they may get read a lot. That kind of thing is hard to predict, but more on that when we talk about the story. Artistically, this is all drawn and colored by Neon. You can see some pretty representative art here on the covers. There's actually, if you look at the backs, you can see kind of what the full art looks like. This is pretty good stuff. Good composition, good colors, good lines. It's very much a comic aimed at young adults, so it has kind of a YA art style to it. This looks more like a shonen or a shoujo manga than it does Frank Miller or something like that. And that's perfectly fine. This art serves the story really well. I do have to add a caveat to it, though, and I like to call this caveat the webcomic caveat. Webcomics are, they tend to start out a little bit rough, and there are a bunch of reasons for that. Usually they're done by talented amateur artists. That's not the case here. Neon is, of course, or he was, a professional comic artist, even at the time he was working on this book, in point of fact. But there is still something that comes from having extra sets of eyes looking at your art, an editor, a colorist, or an inker to really look at your art and look for those moments in the composition where there are too many panels, where things aren't entirely clear, where maybe your proportions or your perspective is a little bit off. There are occasional moments like that in this book. And by this book, I just mean the first one. Because generally that works itself out over time. I would say after about 50 to 75 pages of this, Neon and Geeky had a system for checking their compositions and their art worked out. Things improved. Now, it's not as big an improvement as you might see in the typical webcomic, over the course of about 2 or 3 years. That's because Neon was already a professional artist. He already had a sense for what needed to be done. He just didn't have a process worked out for how to do it all with the manpower he had and the time he had. And, manpower and time constraints are real when you're the indie working for yourself. So I don't hold those against him. Some people, they have a really hard time getting past that. It's very short in this comic. Like I said, it's about 50, maybe 75 pages. And while that would be, the entirety of like 2 issues of a floppy, this doesn't have page numbers, so I'm not entirely sure how many pages this is. I would say this is about 150 pages in here. So yeah, and there's a whole second volume that's all of roughly this quality that you see on the cover. It's good art. It's good art, but it does have that minor caveat to it. So some examples of art you can expect. Like here's just a simple dialogue page, and as you can see, the proportions are good. It's not all flat angles. There's good perspectives, and it's not exactly dynamic because it is dialogue, but it leads the eye well. Everything flows, and that's good stuff to see. There are also more of the swashbuckling adventure type of shots. I will try and find one of those now. So here's a good action scene, and again we can see good composition, a mixture of angles and perspectives and kinds of shots that give you a sense of what's going on. And this is not, it's not the greatest action or dialogue layout ever, but it is pretty good. I would give this art an A-. With a webcomic caveat, again, it probably starts around a B-, which is still better than most webcomics. And it improves to that A- over the course of roughly the first year, or 6 months to a year of publication, I would say. And again, if you're already familiar with webcomics, that is a really good rate of improvement. So props to Neon. He was working in an unfamiliar environment, unfamiliar process, and he worked it out pretty quickly. Let's talk about the story. The story is your typical Portal fiction with a steampunk fantasy world. If you don't know what Portal fiction is, it's similar to the more commonly used term isekai now. There are some pretty significant differences, though. The best way to think of it is as the Chronicles of Narnia. It is a story of people who go to an exotic, fantastical world and then come back. And the big thing about Portal fiction in particular is that, unlike your typical isekai, the protagonists almost always believe there is a way to go back. Isekai, protagonist has usually died in their previous world and is reincarnated, or some other magical mumbo jumbo is at play there. Whereas in this, not so much. So let's talk about the story in specifics. Our protagonist from Earth is Mia. She is the one who goes through the portal to the world of Bellatir, or Bellatire. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but I'm going to go with Bellatir because Bellatire sounds like a place where I would get new tires for my car, and that's not fantastic. It's just boring. So Mia goes to Bellatir because she gets some heirlooms from her grandmother, and she finds a magic ring in it, this ring that we see right here on the cover, and it transports her to the other world. There she meets Ren, who is our other protagonist. Ren is one of the last mages in the world of Bellatir, and there's a lot of interesting reasons for that, which I'm gonna talk about the world building in a minute. But let's just cover the basics of the story. So Mia is our fish out of water. She grounds the story. She gives us a little bit of that what's going on perspective that is so helpful for readers, and generally so frustrating for authors because they have to find a way to make all of this introductory dialogue seem natural. And of course, Mia, as a person from modern day Earth, knows nothing about this world with its magics and its sorcery, so that works pretty well, just like you would expect it to. Mia also transitions back and forth between Earth and Bellatir on a fairly regular basis, which is unusual-ish in a Portal fiction story. A lot of Portal fiction, there tends to be a major chunk in the fantasy realm, and then maybe a major chunk at the end back on Earth, maybe one or two flip-flops back and forth. And while each chapter in here typically features Mia going each way once, so from Earth to Bellatir and back about once per chapter, she is still kind of in that revolving door going back and forth. There are a lot of interesting rules there that are not made entirely clear over the course of the story, but again, I'm going to get to that in world building. So let's just stick to the plot and the characters in here. So that's Mia. Her character is refreshingly feminine, and I don't really know of a better way to say it than that. She very much reads like a middle school to high school age girl who is, I think, the target audience of this. I think there's some stuff in here that would appeal to boys of about that age as well. But by and large, I think that the target audience is girls between the ages of 10 and 16. And Mia reads very much like most of the girls that age that I've known. She's not this weird modern entertainment attempt at these girls that is ridiculously sassy and overconfident in every respect, and never shows any kind of hesitation except when it's appropriate for the plot or character development. She's somewhat unsure. She doesn't have a whole lot of self-confidence at the beginning of the story, although her traveling back and forth certainly serves to build that confidence. She is kind of shy. She is a little hesitant as to what her place in the world is, especially once she winds up in a totally alien world. And she is, on the whole, just a really refreshing change from the kind of female protagonist that I've seen in most media for the last 6 or 7 years. So now I know that this started in 2010, which is more than a decade ago now. And so clearly she's going to be different than what we get today. And that's not bad. That's really good. I think that really helps Shadowbinders stand out from the crowd, is having this really authentic feeling female character in the lead. Now, Ren is, he's a bit different. He is not that different from certain archetypes of male protagonists. Ren is a playboy. He's very confident, has a lot of power at his disposal, being one of the last mages. He's well known in his world, so he's kind of famous. He kind of reminds me, and I'm sure at this point everyone is tired of hearing this, but he reminds me a little bit of Tony Stark. Obviously, he's a wizard, so not Tony Stark in truth. He's also not Doctor Strange, so we've avoided all of the obvious Marvel comparisons here. Ren is really his own character, and that's good. And at the same time, I kind of feel like Ren invites a lot of comparisons that he's not going to benefit a whole lot from. I think if he developed a little bit more, I would like him more. But I didn't see quite enough of Ren really make him distinct in my mind. He's similar to a lot of other, well, for lack of a better term, romance leads. He's kind of cocky, very independent, and he has a lot of status in his world that comes from a mixture of wealth, reputation, and physical, or in this case, magical power. There's nothing wrong with that. Those are the ingredients of a very respectable male lead. I just don't think that in what we have here, he gets as developed as I would like him to be. There are other characters in Shadowbinders, background characters. There's a very large and interesting-looking group of villains that I would like to get to know better. I can't really say a whole lot about them because most of them don't have a whole lot of screen time, other than the crew of the, what is the airship's name? I should have looked this up. I don't remember the name of the airship that they have, but the crew of the airship is kind of interesting. The only character who stands out a whole lot so far is Winston, who you can hear. And he's a Phoebe, and that's really about all we know about him. He's clearly the mascot character of the crew. He fills that role pretty well. He's also the sarcastic member of the crew. He also fills that role pretty well. And yeah, that's the really strong members of the crew are Winston and Ren. There's some other characters who have a lot of promise in how they develop. There's an interesting romance among the crew members that's going. But the only character who gets a lot of development is Ren. And again, what we see of him is that he is kind of just shaping up to be male protagonist in a women's story. And again, I don't say that as a knock, other than I feel like his character could be developed more. So again, there's nothing actively bad there. There's just an absence of things that really stand out. Now, on Earth, Mia spends probably about a quarter of the story on Earth, where she has, of course, two close friends, and she also has to deal with the mean girls, and she has a crush on a jock at school, which is, crazy because it's obvious to anyone reading this that Ren is supposed to be the romantic pairing, at least for the majority of the story. But, these characters, they have their own crazy thoughts. They go out, they do their own things, ignoring, obviously, what the plot wants them to do. So these elements are going to come up. They're executed on very well, but again, there's nothing about them that really stands out as different from your average teen girl entertainment. Now, a well-executed story is its own reward, and I think in that, Shadowbinders is praiseworthy. It is executing on story elements it sets up really well. But the thing that really makes it interesting is the fantasy aspect and the world building. And this is what's really going to set it apart from other stories. So how good of a world is Bellatir? Well, it has a fascinating magic system in which magic is inherited by bloodline, which is, kind of standard. But it's always inherited by the first child of a mage of their same gender. That's interesting. An interesting world building element. Always the first child and no one else. So mages are not a replenishing resource. In fact, they're a dwindling resource, which is why Ren is one of the last mages in the world. Ooh, very interesting. That is a great idea, and props to the Clownfish team. Neon and Geeky Sparkles came up with something that's really fascinating there. And also the possibility that Mia is a mage from Earth who inherited a talent. We're not sure where from, although possibly her grandmother was from Bellatir and not from Earth. If Mia represents the ability to introduce new mages into Bellatir, that's an interesting conflict from all kinds of different angles. So yeah, very, very fascinating way of tapping into magic there, or at least controlling where magic appears in your world. It creates a lot of interesting social problems. It creates a lot of interesting conflicts for of the story type, not necessarily in between nations or in between, with magic itself, but in between the characters, it creates a lot of interesting conflicts, not all of which have been explored yet. And I would like to see more of that. Beyond that, we know that Bellatir has a bunch of interesting creatures that don't exist in the world. There is a Phoebe like Winston. There are living shadows, which are very interesting part of the world. They have magical technology like airships and things like that. We know there is a political situation with a balance of power between 4 separate nations. And while it is kind of one of my personal gripes to see the politics in a world cut down to a matter of 4 or 5 different places, I know that in a real world, it would be 4 or 5 major centers of power with a bunch of smaller satellites that are controlled through proxy or are allied with the big ones, and they all have distinct cultures and different wants that may result in all this kind of flipping back and forth and Game of Thrones style political machinations. And while I find learning about those kinds of cultures really interesting, and I find them being oversimplified a little bit annoying. This is fantasy, and they do tend to boil things down that way, so I don't really hold it against them. I would like to see in the future maybe a little more distinct personality given to specific places in each country. So far, we really haven't been to more than one place in each country that we visited, and we haven't visited all 4 countries yet either. So I don't have a lot to really complain about there. There are also sky pirates. That's really interesting. There are a lot of interesting details to the world, but the thing that I think really makes it stand out, is really interesting, is really going to grab people's attention, that interesting and limited way of passing magic from one person to the next generation. And hopefully, a great deal of the story and conflict that is coming will focus on what that will mean for Ren, who is one of the last living mages, and for Mia, who is apparently the only existing female mage in the world. And yeah, that's just such a great story hook. It hasn't been played with a whole lot yet. I hope to see it played with more. Which brings me to the last aspect of Shadowbinders that has to be talked about before I give a final assessment of these books, and that is the fact that it is not an ongoing story. Neon and Gigi stopped producing it in 2018 because they needed to work on other projects that would keep them financially afloat. That's the curse of being an indie creator. They're doing really well on those projects now. Pirates and Princesses is doing quite well. Their YouTube channel is doing quite well. All of those things eat up a lot of their time, and there's no guarantee we're going to see more of this story. And it kind of ends on a cliffhanger right now. So, that is something for you to consider before you invest in it. If you cannot deal with just reading part of a story and never knowing how it ends, wait on this. You will not enjoy just reading these 2 volumes, because there is nothing even remotely like conclusive end to the story. Neon and Gigi have talked repeatedly about maybe coming back to this now that they have some more stable income set up, now that they're more independent. That hasn't happened yet. I would love to see it happen. I think they have a good thing here. They have some really good ideas. They have a solid grasp on character writing. I do think they need to differentiate their characters from the crowd a little bit more, but otherwise, I think they have the beginnings of a really solid story, and I would like to see more of it. And I would like to continue adding these kind of wonderful hardback books to my collection. I'd like to be able to share them with my niece when she turns about 12 in a few years now. I think she would really love them. But yeah, right now, I can only recommend these if you're looking for a story. Either you really like indie comics, or you're looking for a story for a young girl in your life, and you're okay with only having part of it. So that's all I got for you today. You can let me know what you think down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button you can use as you see fit, and I will talk to you later.